It's more a comment, actually, because I've been talking to people, my friends, about what's happening at the moment. I feel really proud of suffrage and what the British women went through. And in history, we've had many strong women leaders. I was reminded, Elizabeth I was incredibly powerful, as of course was Queen Victoria. We've had Maggie Thatcher, and we've now got Theresa May. And I happened to be listening to Women's Hour last week, and I was absolutely horrified to hear that we are 73rd in the world, behind Afghanistan, in terms of the percentage of women that are in Parliament. And I feel overwhelmed by the misogyny of our society, and I'm quite depressed. And when I look at Parliament, the women who seem to have the most fire in their belly are the young SNP women and the Scots. And I don't know, I just wonder, why are English women really so damped down? And what went wrong, for God's sake? It feels like some powerful spell was cast over us. At that time, men so furious to get their own back on us or something. And we just don't seem to have ever really fought back in a way that's made a difference. That's how it feels. And I had the privilege to work in a marketing company where our chairman was a man who thought women made the best managers. And there were loads of women managers. And then when I came out of that company, I was horrified at the state of British management in general. So I don't want to leave it on that sort of a note, but I just feel I have to say that.
Again, just a series of comments. As a black male, I seem to be the only one here tonight. The reason I'm particularly interested in what's going on at the moment is because it kind of mirrors in some way the struggle for the end of slavery, in emancipation, which I'm an Afro-Caribbean, so in the 1830s, 34 to 37 in my part of the Caribbean. With what happened 50 years later, or to the mass turn of the 20th century. One thing I wanted to know was, what was the time difference between when the Mrs. Dickinson, is it, got knocked over by the King's Horse, and 1918 when the first women got the right to vote in England? That's one question. And just another comment about, as it Mary's point about the wrong body type. I was rather surprised that was raised, because it's the wrong body type for Emily Pankhurst being played by Meryl Streep. The King, King George V, was definitely the wrong body type in the film. He was a tall man. The real King George V was a small man. Obviously the Queen seems to have inherited that size, particularly these days. And the other thing, not particularly to do with the suffragette movement at all, but what was going on in the fictional story about the, what was her name, Maud, and her husband. It looks as though the husband was complicit in her situation in the factory, because he actually worked there, and he saw what was going on vis-a-vis the manager of Mumford, and although he took a stand about her taking part in the suffragette movement and actually stopped his wife having anything to do with the child, he didn't put his foot down vis-a-vis the relationship between the manager and his wife, and that, to me, that didn't come across correctly at all.
One thing about the number of women who could vote in that first one, where they set the age, I heard, probably on Women's Hour again, that if they gave the same rights as they did to men, in 1918, there would have been more women
right.
voting, so that's why they put it higher. That's what we heard, which makes sense.
Yes.
And 3 comments really. When I saw this film first, I thought it must be on every curriculum. Every girl needs to see this film for the power of it, which is brilliant. And the husband was another point I was going to make, that there are men victims here as well in that society and in that situation. The husband didn't have any power to do anything about that. He was almost as much a victim, and although obviously he makes those decisions, he didn't have the power to do anything else in those circumstances. So I don't feel he was betraying her. I felt that he was just as powerless as she was in some of those circumstances. The other thing that when I first saw the film was the shock of those dates at the end. That was just gobsmacking, and particularly that last one. And also that New Zealand was so much further advanced. Why is all that?
That was great.
Actually, those dates are a problem because black people didn't have the vote in Australia or in the United States at the time. So that's slightly misleading too. It was really problematic.
Do you mean black women or?
No, black people.
Men and black people. The women had the vote at that time, but no black people did.
Yeah.
Can I just respond to the point that was made about the parallels to slavery, yes, that you made, which is very interesting because there is a way in which you can understand that the rise of feminism really came out of, well, not wholly, but a lot of women were involved in the abolitionist movement, the abolition of slavery in Britain and of course in the States, but those women in Britain started to see the parallels in their own life. They started to think, well, of course we're enslaved within marriage, and it was actually a kind of trigger. Many of them moved from being involved in the abolitionist movement straight into the early beginnings of feminism. So there was a direct relationship both in Britain and in the States. And then you asked, sorry, just quickly, you asked a question about the dates. Emily Wilding Nevison threw herself under Anna, the King's horse, in June 1913, and most women over 30 got the vote in. It is actually most women over 30. So, I know people say some, but it is actually most, because the property qualification, it's for if you or your husband live in rent or own accommodation, which is £5 a year. So, but of course, what that excludes was women living at home, unmarried women living at home with parents, they wouldn't qualify, or being a domestic servant, which of course was actually a very prominent role for women, job for women. So I've lost the thread of what I was going to say. There was something I was going to say. Anyway, I'll move over to Mary.
No, I've lost the thread as well. I think I was going to say that women can vote in Saudi Arabia. I think I am right on that.
Yes, it said, but when the film was made, it was still being debated.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
I was also going to make the point about the debates around proving you're a citizen to vote. And they went on throughout the 19th century, and what is quite interesting are the debates around should you be single or divorced or a widow. And Parliament got totally tied up with somebody can't vote because they're a widow, somebody can't vote because they're single. And what's fascinating is that none of this applies to men. Nobody ever says a man can't vote because he is married or divorced or widowed. Third point, and very quickly, which is on the relationship between black people in the States and in this country. There is quite a lot of people coming from all over the world to support the suffragettes. Australia, for example, Dora Montefiore. But there's also a black woman called Ida Wells who came to England and went around and spoke. And I suspect there was quite a lot of that going on because of the relationship between women suffragists in this country who were liaising with women fighting for the vote, like Hetty Stanton in the Straits. I suspect there was a lot more touring of black people and people from all over the world than we perhaps sorted out.
I thought Ida B. Wells came over here for anti-lynching
Yes,
movement predominantly, but was it also about suffrage?
Yes.
Okay.
And there's stuff to do, yeah.
It's the woman who died that day why we have the votes. But I won't change the story now. I heard the new story. I'll leave it at that. But at the end of the day, looking in evening Parliament now, and knowing what women of colour was here from 1911, and they just get the chance to meet for voting and to be in Parliament, and seeing one of my Sunday school students who's now a member of Parliament, I am very proud and know that we make a difference. And at the end of the day, someone looked at me many years ago and said they wouldn't vote for me at the beginning because the picture they looked at, they thought I was a man. But when they saw me, they changed their mind and they did vote for me. So the opportunity comes, but it comes very, very hard. But we make a difference, and it's good to see women of different nationality now in Parliament. So I believe all of us should take up that vote.